This is the Delta 1 to 10. If you're looking for the perfect LPVO, well, we're not there yet. The 1 to 10 LPVO, they're really hard to do right. When we last looked at one, it was the EOTech Voodoo 1 to 10. It did a lot of things right, but came up short on illumination and top-end magnification clarity. That's about what to expect when we're working at the bleeding edge of LPVO development. Well, Delta Optical is walking up to that ledge now with their 1 to 10, which they did graciously send into this channel for review. If you don't remember them, they made one of the best LPVOs available, the Delta Stryker 1 to 6, which we looked at in an earlier video. I'll link to it if you have already seen it. Considering how difficult it is to get everything right when it comes to a 1 to 10 LPVO, how'd they do? Well, Delta was able to improve upon some things from Voodoo in some areas, but still not perfect. So first things first, I don't have any extra info on where these scopes are built or where they get their parts. For all I know, everybody's buying from the same OEM and just slapping their logos on them. I only bring this up because at first glance, the Delta 1 to 10 is very similar to the Voodoo 1 to 10. So weighing in at around 21 ounces, measuring about 10.6 inches, it's almost exactly the same as the Voodoo externally. Speaking of that weight, remember this is a 34mm scope tube, so be sure to get the right mount. We're using the Warren mounts here. Additionally, this also shares the same larger objective lens at 28mm versus the usual 24mm that you get in LPVO, which does give you additional play in the eye box. And since we're talking externals, take a closer look at the controls. So looking at the turrets, Delta did a more consistent job with them versus the Voodoo. If you remember, the Voodoo design consisted of an exposed vertical turret and a capped windage knob. For the Delta, both turrets now operate the same way, which I like. Lift up to spin and push down to lock into place. Easy to remember and just a little bit of play at rest. The turrets feel great to turn and solid when they're adjusted, with 0.1 mils between clicks, so you'll have plenty of precision. The top turret's not too tall either, so if you want to run a piggyback red dot out front, you can do it without too much obstruction. Towards the rear, you'll find the diopter, which turns really smooth. You also have a center witness mark, so you'll have a visual indicator how far you've moved it. As for the magnification dial, it turns really smooth and really quick. It comes with 2 throw levers, one short, one tall. Just remember that only the magnification ring spins here, as opposed to the entire ocular like the Voodoo design. On the left, you'll find the illumination knob, where Delta also did a better job versus the Voodoo. Instead of that clunky push button design, they went back with a more traditional rotary dial with off positions in between. The numbers are easy to see and the knob turns quickly with plenty of tactile feedback. And last but not least, you'll find one thing that the Voodoo and many other LPVOs lack, which is a side focus and parallax knob. As a reminder, if your eye is off center from next to people, you could induce parallax, so it looks like the reticle is moving around the target. Having a side focus allows you to adjust the reticle to bring it into the same plane as the target to help minimize that parallax. On the switch here on the side, I'm not really sure what the CQB setting does, so personally I would leave it at 100 and only spin it up to LR when you're shooting 400 yards and longer. Now with the externals out of the way, let's take a closer look at glass performance. So when it comes to glass performance, first focal plane scopes is generally not as clear at 1x as second focal plane scopes. But for this scope, when we're talking glass clarity, it's exceptional because at 1x it's really just beautiful to look at, very much like the Voodoo. Extremely clear starting from the center on out to the edge. You really have to look really hard at the very edge for any sign of distortion. Japanese XC high density glass, which they have on their marketing materials, I think it's just a pleasure to look through at 1x. And when you pair that clear glass, you also have the 1x field of view, which is very wide. When you have that along with this really thin bezel, you get a really flat sight picture that's really perfect for fast and comfortable 1x shooting. It's very, very nice to look through the scope as targets move into and out of field of view at 1x. So speaking of engaging close range targets, let's talk about illumination. Unfortunately, this scope is similar to the Voodoo, so at its brightest setting of 10, this reticle is what I classify as daylight red. So if it's high noon and you're pointing this thing on a bright target, the illumination is not enough to stand out from that sunlight. But if you're shooting in the shadow or an IPSC target is backlit, you'll be able to make out that red illumination. And since this is a first focal plane reticle and it's not daylight bright, you have to make it large enough to be seen without illumination. Like the Voodoo, Delta also uses the large outer ring to help bracket and center targets. Well, in practical usage, just like the Voodoo, it's way too large at 69 mils across, so you really can only use it point blank range, because even at 10 yards, you can see that it encompasses the entire full length of an IPSC target. And within that big circle, you also have the smaller aiming point. Delta chose to use these chunky triangles that point toward the center and help center the eye. So in my opinion, they do a better job here to making the center reticle more visible versus the Voodoo's inner donut. You will still need to take a little extra time to aim if it's a high contrast target due to the illumination though. As far as eye relief eye box, plenty at 1x, and you're not gonna have any issues getting a comfortable sight picture. So even if you're working support side or barricade, you're not gonna have any issues with scope alignment. This larger objective lens like the Voodoo does help increase the exit pupil size somewhat, although once you get to 10x magnification, going to get really tight. So while we're talking about 10x, let's talk about that magnified view. In short, it's very good, very crisp with good color and clarity without too much distortion. As you can see, there's a bit of purple color fringing on bright sunny days, so if you're shooting out in those conditions, just be aware of it. And one caveat about that clarity though, as you make your way up the magnification scale, it holds its clarity up to about 8x or so. But once you get to 10x, it starts to get noticeably more distorted. While that center remains clear, the fisheye effect starts to settle in at max magnification. So if you were to compare this optic versus others at anything but 10x, it would hold its own, but it's really not at its best at max magnification. So since we're talking about the reticle, let's take a closer look at it when it comes to long range. So with this optic, you only get one reticle, the S-Dog1 MRAD. In my opinion, it's got everything you need for shooting long range. Starting in the center with a small crosshairs instead of a dot, you're gonna be able to get a very precise aiming point with those crosshairs.
189.
Once you zoom in, those thick aiming triangles we had earlier, 1x get pushed out from the center. So the center has plenty of space around the center reticle to see near misses and look for targets. To the sides, you have a 4 mil wide ladder in 0.5 mil increments for arranging. And on this perfect Christmas tree ladder, you get 10 mils down with spacing between the big hashes at 1 mil and 0.5 mils in between big and small. It's really easy to work with, especially if you can see it quickly because you have even numbered labeling on the mils. It's also got plenty of 1 mil wide wind holds to each side. So it starts at 3, ends up with 5 down at the bottom. So plenty of wind holds. So if you're looking at Stryker Pro again for our holes, for our test ammo, we're shooting 69 grain reloads going 2650 with a 100-yard zero through a 16-inch Criterion barrel. So as far as the reticle, Stryker does not have this reticle yet, but you can choose another Christmas tree reticle with the same subtensions like the Night Force FC DMX. Also, you can use the calculate button, type in your yards, and it'll tell you your mil drops. So just look for those mil lines on the Christmas tree.
Hit.
So for final thoughts, this scope just got released, so there's very few places carrying it. At $16.95, it's sitting in the same ballpark as the Voodoo 110, a little bit cheaper than the Night Force NXH, which we looked at earlier. I'll link to it if you haven't already seen it. Ironically, that Night Force also has some excellent features, but also has some issues with 1x clarity and top level magnification. It seems to me that once you start pushing the top edge magnification, especially in an LPVO body, you start to run into issues. So there's a lot of give and take. So you have to decide which compromises you're willing to work with. So the Delta 110, it's not a home run like the 1-6 Stryker they had earlier, but I'd say, hey, if you're willing to work with an offset red dot for your 1x needs and you're not too picky for top end magnification clarity, it's worth a look. So that's it for me, guys. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and comment because it helps keep us growing. And as always, check the comments for any gear that you're interested in. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you guys next time.